So welcome. I'm Hester Tinti-Kane. I'm the CEO of EdTech Times, and we have a fantastic panel this morning. Our focus is on extended reality in education and how, in particular, content creation in extended reality can really democratize that platform and computer science in general. So we want to have as interactive a session as we can. Please feel free to stop and interrupt us whenever you have a thought or an idea or a question. Welcome. So I'd like to introduce the panel, and we'll just go right down. I had everybody sit in alphabetical order so I can remember people's names a little bit better. So I'd like to introduce Mark Anderson, and he is co-founder and other official title at Lifelike?
President, yep.
Of Lifelike?
Yeah.
Yep, and you're down from San Francisco today, right?
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
Excellent, great. And we have Nick Clayton, and he is from a local school district that you're going to have to say out loud a second time.
Victor Elementary School District.
Victor Elementary School District.
Somewhat
and
local.
What are the ages of students you teach?
I teach 4th, 5th, and 6th grade special education students.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
And we have Hassan Karani here. He is with the Facebook EdMod team. And we have Anthony Owen here, and he is with the State of Arkansas Department of Education, and he is leading computer science. Director of computer science?
Director of Computer Science, and recently named Chief State STEM Officer.
Fantastic. Nice. So we've got some really interesting initiatives that are being worked on in both of these cases. So maybe we can start with you, Nick, and you can talk to us a little bit about the initiative that you've been working on with Lifelike.
Sure. As far as Lifelike goes, I've been involved in bringing it to my classroom, talking about it with my district. I'm a part of the district technology committee, and Lifelike, I have students that are really interested in science. Yes, we have a question.
I want to start by saying what Lifelike is.
Yeah. Yeah, Lifelike is a online digital 3D model for science, math, all different kinds of curriculum. He could probably speak a little better about it. But it has online digital models that are labeled, and you can touch those models and move those models around either with an iPad or different devices. Students can access the models. Teachers, there's a curriculum that goes along with it as well. So teachers can actually teach and have the models embedded into the curriculum as they're teaching it. But then students can actually see those things in real life and see them as digital products and touch them and move them around. But I've been using it in my classroom, and I've also been working on virtual reality and research in my classroom. And so they kind of are pushing into the higher end virtual reality right now, hoping that they get into the lower end as well soon. But they've also been, they came to my classroom on Friday and brought their higher end, the HTC Vive, and my students got to experience it, and HoloLens as well, which is pretty amazing. A little out of my price range, but they got to experience it and see the models and walk around the models and walk through dinosaurs, walk on the top of the International Space Station. So it's a future that they're going to be in and a reality they're going to be in. So it's pretty important to have that in my curriculum every day.
So before we dive in a little bit deeper into what Lifelike is and all the details, and thanks for the prompt, can you just speak, Nick, a little bit to why extended reality in your classroom? What's the goal, really?
As far as the goal, it's giving my students, first of all, they're special education students, so giving them any way possible to learn the content that they might not learn in textbooks or may not learn in just the regular curriculum that's pushed through in my district. They really need those extended activities or those activities that are more hands-on or more just things that they don't normally learn in the normal way. So it's really important to me to include this content, 3D, digital, VR content, where they can experience something that they might not experience in their everyday lives. And I also work in a very high poverty district, so they don't necessarily always even get out of their city a lot of the time. Mm-hmm. So it's important for me to give them experiences that they might not normally get. And even in their near future, in their academic future. And I think it's really powerful for them, and just to see that wonder and excitement in their eyes. So,
Cool.
excitement for learning anytime is pretty important for teachers. So,
Absolutely. So Mark, can you just tell us a little bit more about Lifelike, your organization, how long you've been around, and what it is that you are bringing to the table?
Sure, Hester. Good morning. So basically, Lifelike, as Nick was saying, so we are a digital platform for students to learn and create in 3D. And so we've been we launched our platform a couple years ago, and this platform, I should start with the definition, which is you have heard or will hear increasingly this phrase XR, as Hester was saying. So it's a shorthand now for, we take it as interactive 3D models, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality on HoloLens. There are a number of virtual realities out there with a number of headsets for that experience, that reality. That's the world that we live in. And basically, that's all that we focus on. We were born out of XR. We were born out of these 3D worlds. And why were we born out of there is because one of our co-founders is dyslexic. Andre is dyslexic. And so when he was a boy, he was in middle school, and he was so frustrated just learning from textbooks. And he was like, well, there's all this text, drowning in text. He just felt there had to be a better way to learn. So it was in the back of his mind for years, and then he saw a friend of his tinkering around making an interactive 3D model, and he saw that and he said, well, that's what I wish I had as a boy. If I could have learned in 3D, that would have been really helpful. Not exclusively in 3D, of course. We all learn in multiple modes, of course, but we really believe that 3D learning has been shortchanged for decades. The last thing I just want to mention is, our belief is all change around the world in education is driven, at the teacher level, it's driven by inspirational teachers. I had the privilege of being in Nick's class for a half-day Friday. It was an extraordinary event. If I could have taken all of you with me on that day, you would not believe your eyes, except when you're working with other inspirational teachers, which you all do. I'm in all types of schools. I've never seen a higher performing group of students, more motivated, more excited, students sprinting into class because they were learning immersively that day, walking into class yelling out, awesome, jumping up and down, waiting for their turn. One boy sadly was crying at the end of class because he couldn't get a second turn. And this is a group of special needs students. So what Nick is doing in his classroom is you'll find in about 3 or 4 classrooms, 3 or 4% of the classrooms around the world, but it's teachers like Nick driving all the great change.
That's awesome. Great. So now, Anthony, I'd like you to share a bit about your initiative and the goal as well, and then we can have Hassan fill in what Facebook's bringing to the table for Arkansas.
Sure, wonderful. Thank you for having me, and want to just say thank you to Nick. Coming from State Department, it is truly the teachers that make the difference for our students. I'll first just briefly talk about the CS initiative overall for the state of Arkansas. So Governor Hutchinson, when he ran in 2014 for office, promised to bring he calls it computer coding, to every student in the state of Arkansas. And that's a branding, just like we have code.org, not computerscience.org, but coding, we all know that it's just a subset of it. As we started building out the initiative, we really found fertile ground across the nation of the ability to jump to the forefront as a state and bringing something like this to every student. And when I say something like this, I'm talking about a CS initiative as a whole. There are a lot of states around the nation that have had grassroots efforts. There are some that have tried a top-down policy module but have not either had the funding side of it or had not had the legislative side of it. So one reason Arkansas has been so successful is honestly, between our strategic plan that we developed out, which kind of outlines our goals and objectives for the first 10 years initiative, we also focus very heavily on Code.org's policy suggestions from a top-down state level. We had full bipartisan support that has put basically $15 million dedicated to CS education over 6 years. That's more than any other state in the nation. We have had legislation, comprehensive legislation, that requires every high school to make available to students at least one high-quality computer science course. No, we don't consider typing or spreadsheet manipulation as computer science. And honestly, that gets into the equity and access issue. We saw an increase from about 1,000 students across the state taking a high-quality computer science course to over 4,000 in just 1 year of the initiative.
Wow.
So based on the growth and based on, and I could talk about that for a while, and that's usually what I share is how our initiative ramped up. But I want to circle around to really how we got Facebook involved and just that partnership and expound a little bit upon that as part of this greater initiative. One thing that our office does get is a lot of contact from companies that want to be involved. When you're leading something, you have companies that want to be involved in it. So I always try to say, well, what is it that this company does that's a niche market that they do well and can be a benefit to my state and my students? So we're setting in, we start having meetings with Facebook executives, and after about the fourth meeting of Facebook VPs flying out to Arkansas, we're sitting around a conference table, and we had started these conversations of TechStart providing a small pilot of schools, say 20 schools with the full VR kit, maybe 40 schools I think was thrown out at one point. So we're talking somewhere around a $40,000 donation, which, is great. I wasn't going to turn it down if that's all we could get. But I'm sitting here looking across the table at these VPs, and I just finally, I'm a lawyer, so I sometimes I'm a little more blunt than I should be. But I said, y'all have spent more money in traveling to Arkansas than we're talking about the entire donation. Let's stop talking about 40 schools. Y'all are Facebook. And they said, well, what do you want? And I said, well, I want every first meeting there, they had said that, I said that I want every high school in the state of Arkansas to have one of these kits, and I knew that was my end goal. But sometimes you have to play that mouse a cookie game. So, I said, well, y'all have said that your organizational goals are to meet students or provide this equipment to students in the highest need areas. And I said, we have a metric that we use, free and reduced lunch. I said, what if we gave every school in the state of Arkansas that has at least 50% free and reduced lunch students one of these VR kits? And I said, but I want a second kid for our East Initiative. And I'll let Hassan talk a little bit more about our East Initiative, because hearing it from an outside perspective is always so much more exciting. I love East, by the way. So they actually agreed. In that meeting, they said, how many kits are we talking? I said, well, we'll need some for training because we'll need to train these teachers. I'm not going to just put equipment in there. And they said, well, how many? I said, 500. And so these are $2,500 kits, basically. So just right off the bat there, we had a sizable an agreement for a sizable donation to the state and the students of Arkansas, but we had already worked out a training plan, a way to distribute those systems to the schools to ensure that they're actually being used, not just equipment set in the closet collecting dust. So we see those kits and VR XR as a tool in our students' computer science bag of tricks, so to speak. We're not developing a whole course in the state around XR or VR. We don't want to do that as a state. We have our computer science courses, and we want the students, since we don't write that they have to learn to a specific platform, we want our students to incorporate as needed or as warranted the development of content for those VR kits or for other XR mediums as warranted in their educational experiences. And honestly, our end goal for this is to have our students have, a larger proportion of our students have access to this and have been, had experience programming for these platforms. So really, they're kind of on the front end of where mobile smartphone app development was 10, 12 years ago.
Right. So Hassan, let's hear from the Facebook side what this initiative looked like.
Well, first I got to talk about East. It's a mandate from Director of STEM now. Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so can't
Chief State STEM Officer.
Yeah, can't skip on that one. Well, East is awesome, and definitely want to talk about that because it's been a huge part of the initiative. I think it stands for Environmental and Spatial Technologies, and it's this program in Arkansas that runs an elective course throughout their high schools, and they have a really interesting model where their teachers are actually aggressively referred to as facilitators instead of teachers, and the students are driving a lot of the projects. And what their goal is for the year is to just build something that matters to their community. And it's incredible to see what they end up making. We were actually just at their conference that they have. It's like a giant science fair about 2 weeks ago. And some of the things that I remember seeing is that these students independently decided that they were going to build something to help out their facilitator. She is missing a hand, so she only had a wrist nub. So they 3D printed a prosthetic hand that she could put on, and when she bends her wrist, it closes that prosthetic. Other students created this like alert mechanism that tells cops when a baby has been left in a car seat so that they can go to the car, find it using GPS that they put in that, and then save the baby. And it's incredible that the way that this is happening is these high school students being told, like, go find value to add in your community. So definitely had to give a quick plug for East before I jump in. But from the Facebook side, that's the type of stuff that we're really excited about. Like, we want to empower the next generation of content creators. And with VR, that's pretty much a greenfield. I mean, the space just became very accessible to consumers, to schools, to different people. And a lot of our work on the EdMod team is focused on how do we get people to create content with these cutting edge technologies. And I mean, we've had a blast doing that with Arkansas so far. I don't know if there's more specifically that you want to dive into or anybody else wants to hear.
Facebook want to partner with my classroom. I'm creating content in VR, so honestly, no.
So that was
We'll have a conversation later.
I was just going to say, Hassan, that was great to actually hear you describe some of what you saw there at the East Science Fair, if that's what it is. So Nick, I know that you had a couple of examples, and we were originally going to show a visual, but I think you could probably talk us through. Can you just actually share some of what your students are building with Lifelike?
Yeah, with Lifelike, Lifelike has some really interesting features on it. There's one feature where you can actually see the models in augmented reality, so you can see the models that you turn the camera on. Either on, my students have Chromebooks, but they also use it on iPads, and they can turn the camera on and see the model in the space that they're in. So they see, like, they can have a bug sitting on their shoulder, or they can spin the planets around, or see, whatever it is, whatever model they're using, they can see it in real life. And so I kind of challenge. I have a student who's autistic in my classroom who just runs with Lifelike. That's his go-to program. He when he wants the iPad, or when he's done with his work, which he's one of my higher end students, and he's done with his work, he wants to go to Lifelike. He wants to see the model of the volcano. He's obsessed with volcanoes. He wants to see the model and see all the breakdown of the volcano, how the magma works and everything. And Lifelike has an actual moving model of that. But I challenged him to create a project with it, and we were learning about seasons at the time, and there's a model of a leaf, and he actually took the model of the leaf and went outside, turned on the augmented reality, found a tree. It was winter at the time, and found a tree, or fall at the time, and found a tree that had no leaves on it, and took a picture with the leaf in the tree, and then he put it onto slides. You can actually save it onto Google Drive, which we have, and he put it right from the slides right from the picture onto Google Slides, and did a presentation and talked about leaves and the seasons and all that with the Lifelike pictures that he was doing. So he's creating this digital project with the models that they use. I use all kinds of programs for VR creation, but it's having that in real life and having those models in real life it just makes more of a connection for my students. So that's part of what they're building. The more they're talking about it, the more I want to get them into 3D development, like actually building and creating 3D models. But it's kind of on the higher end of their understanding. But I think that's kind of where I'm leading into having them become sort of 3D developers in elementary school, hopefully. So we'll see.
So before we move on to sort of the next things that I wanted us to be able to share, anyone here in the audience want to ask a specific question about the work that you just heard about happening here in California, happening in Arkansas? Please.
Question for Nick. So I can see this being very
I would say I probably do to a degree, but I also have electives where I bring students into my classroom, and you know, these technologies, I kind of work them into just my everyday, my reading and writing and everything, and they actually have a full aligned curriculum to NGSS and to Common Core standards. So this, I mean, if they're teaching science, this can be aligned to those areas, and they can work that into their curriculum. But also, you know, the curriculum is out there, so they could adopt it, and it can be part of that everyday teaching. And he goes out. Mark goes out to schools and kind of shows them how to adopt this. And I mean, it's pretty well aligned to like science. They have math models on there, so it can easily be added into that curriculum and supplemented. But I mean, I do have a little more autonomy, but I also, everything is aligned to my standards. My IEP goals, everything has to go along with standards. So the things that I'm teaching are aligned to what everyone is beholden to. I just have a different timeline than other teachers. Obviously, you know, they have a certain timeline. They have to get a certain amount of stuff taught. I know the whole, you know, the whole story. But if they have something like a model where they're much more interested and excited to actually see that, you know, that time will be filled in an easier method or an easier way. So I think having these tools are pretty important, because it can get them more excited, can get them more focused and engaged, and that can easily make that time, you know, give them time for other things that they may need to teach. So.
And what I think is interesting, and I know we have a couple more questions, we have Anthony who's really working from a top level down across the districts in his state, and we have Nick who's really working within one district, sort of trying to scale up. So, you know, we've got two great resources here. Some other questions? Yes.
So I guess this is for Hassan and Anthony in a way. So Facebook's goal is to empower the next generation of creators. What investments are being made on the artistic side of like XR? So we've got some investments in the coding side. What about 3D art, animation, you know, what we call technical artists?
Sure. Can I go
Great
first?
question.
You go right ahead, sir.
Oh man, I mean, VR is a natural fit for technical art and art in general. Just by a show of hands, who has tried a VR experience? Who has tried building a VR experience? Still nice, awesome. But building a VR experience, you inherently have to start learning about art, game design, aesthetics, even things as deep as color theory and color palettes. It's very similar in a sense to game design, and actually a lot of the tools that you use for VR development and AR development, they're the same as the game industry and even the film industry. So I think what's really cool about VR, AR, XR broadly is that the tools already lend themselves to more creative outlets such as art and other things like that. And that's a really cool approach, I believe, to introducing STEM in computer science, because you can get beyond just getting students interested in the code and the output of that, and actually show that, you know, computer science is very cross-disciplinary depending on what you apply it to. With the example in VR and AR, you won't be able to create something that is really good without including a lot of technical art. So it's really a natural byproduct of introducing students to it and getting them to create.
Great. Other questions? Sure, yes.
A question for Nick. Do
Yeah.
you find that other teachers, gen ed teachers, are starting to explore what you're doing? Is it spreading at all beyond the classroom?
I think VR in general is spreading. XR is spreading a lot. I talk a lot with teachers on Twitter and outside of my classroom and district. And you know, I started a lot with virtual field trips and like doing the Skype thing and everything. And I think it leads naturally into like exploring and looking at things in VR. And I think the more that I introduce that to the teachers around me, the more fascinating they are. I had a teacher walk by, a kindergarten teacher walk by when we were doing the HoloLens, and she was like, "What are they doing?" And just explaining it to her, just it blows their minds. They become fascinated in it, and I think it's just a fascinating experience in itself. And I think that the more that people develop for that, and the more easier programs there are, and the more that people share, it becomes a lot easier to integrate that into curriculum.
At your school in particular, though?
Yeah, at my school in particular, with my electives, I bring a lot of people in. I have more of the upper grade teams. I bring the experiences to them, and kind of have. I use my lunch break a lot and bring the VR to them. So it's kind of hard with having the devices. Like I share that around to the other grade levels, but it seems like it's well, Lifelike has spread a lot more, but VR in general, it's kind of hard for people to see. It's still like just a new thing. It's still developing. So other than the experiences, it hasn't spread as much to my teams. They're still more focused on worrying about the everyday Common Core and even understanding the Common Core at this point. So I try to work that into whatever they may be doing, and show them that it's kind of important for students to be excited, because the students coming in are just getting bored and not wanting to be there. So this can be something that they want to come to and want to come to school. And the other students, once they leave those experiences, they're going and telling their other classmates. Like my elective students, they walk over. We had 3 general ed students come in, and they went over and told their classmates, and everyone was talking about it afterwards. Like that, it becomes something that they want to see. So the more that I inject that into them, hopefully it will spread more to my school. But.
So I'm actually going to go back to something that Hassan put out there, and you're asking how many people in the room have experienced XR, and then how many people have built in XR. So I mean, it's one thing to provide access. It's another thing to actually facilitate the development. So let's talk a little bit about why building in XR is important, and how that connects with learning. Anyone want to begin with that?
Well, I'll quickly say that the question about the artistic side, and I think this is the question of why Arkansas really went after this initiative. And you hit on one of my ulterior motives for this. And, as people realize that, and you look in the computer science education field, especially at K-12 level, there are not only issues with underrepresented populations, but just general access and enticement for students to take the course overall. So in Arkansas, we're approximately about 10% of our population right now, our high school population, taking computer science. What we see the ability to create content and really get in these emerging fields, and that artistic side especially, is that will attract a whole different group of students to the computer science field, that when you talk to them about computer programming, all they see is all they envision in their mind is the white geeky male sitting in the cubicle with Star Wars posters on the wall. So that's me. So that's what they envision. So if you can have these different technologies that give them a different glimpse into how they can create and be computer scientists, so to speak, and trust me, the programming that goes into creating some of these higher level applications for VR is just as difficult as mobile applications development. I mean, it's basically the same thing. So we see that as not only the ability to, in general, attract more people to the computer science field in the state of Arkansas, but we also see it as another method by which that we can close, hopefully, and I'm painting sort of with a broad brush here, but by making it more approachable by everyone, we also hope to close some of those underserved population gaps, that they may not see computer coding as their niche, but they may see and say, hey, I'd love to create games for the VR Oculus, for the, you know, or the, you know, the other part that we leave out talking about so often, but part of Facebook's donation to Arkansas was every school also received Ricoh 360 camera. So we have a lot of schools using that to create 360 content.
There's a lot of potential, not just in art and gaming and development and science, whatever. There's social, emotional pieces, people filming experiences where they're putting themselves, you know, it's giving people perspectives. There's so many aspects to what VR can do and do for students, just everyday lives.
Well, and as Hassan said, you know, a big portion of our work and best success stories out of this is coming out of our East initiative. And, you know, I have a ton of stories, but I'll share one with you just briefly talking about the 360 camera and the creation of the 360 content. There was a group of students in the East at our North Little Rock High School that obviously with the issues with school shootings that we have, they were very concerned about the safety of their school. So what they actually did was they created a 360 walkthrough of their entire school. It's not public information because that would actually be more detrimental, but they turned that over to local police, walked them through how to use it, actually donated from East to the police station tablets for them to train their officers on and how to access the building and different modes of access and things of that nature. So they're always looking for ways to give back to their community, and this is just another way that they can do some unique things.
That's funny that you were talking about that story, because I was talking to someone who works in schools with VR, and he was talking about having an active shooter simulation in VR for training purposes for teachers to actually not have the actual shooting happen, but have them in a prepared state for when that active shooter thing happens. It's pretty amazing the possibilities that you can use that for. So.
By the way, I have bling for people who ask questions.
Nice.
Good bling too.
It's a 4 gig. It's a 4 gig USB.
It's an Arkansas
Also a
thing.
good arm.
Don't throw it away thinking it's just another lanyard. It's actually got a USB in it. So
let's hear from Hassan and from Mark, from a national perspective and from your organizational perspective, what you think the content creation in XR is bringing and what you hope it to bring.
Jump in.
Sure. So we're in classrooms every week, and what we see is right now students are creating, using our augmented reality to create videos that they're then sharing with themselves, with students, with their teachers as part of their homework. And this happens all the time. This is what Nick was talking about earlier. So for us, we think it's important because if a student is creating, they're learning. And what we now are working on is we're actually, we have a beta going on right now. We partner with Unity. I'm going to explain this. I don't code myself, so I'm going to explain this at a level that I can understand. So if a student wants to create a website if they want to create their own website, they need to know how to code in HTML and CSS is what's typically used. If they want to create their own app in 3D, then they're very commonly using Unity. Now there are other engines out there that can power this, Unreal and so forth. But what we're doing is this feature that we're in beta in right now and that we're launching in a few months, when students will go ahead and create in Unity, publish to our Lifelike platform, and then their work will immediately show up. Well, we're doing two things. It's making the publishing process about 50% easier. And number two, is going to immediately then publish online. And then secondly, in virtual reality on HTC Vive, and then also in mixed reality on the Microsoft HoloLens. So this is the first of the world type of feature that we're launching in about 12 weeks. And this type of creation, this I can tell you from being in classrooms every week for the last couple of years, this is the single biggest, the ability to create is the single biggest request that students have. They love consuming the content, learning in 3D, teachers love teaching in 3D. It is more powerful in a lot of ways, but the ability to create is what they desire the most.
Cool. Hassan?
Well, I love everything that we've said so far. I mean, Anthony talked about how students, they have that natural drive to create things that help their community, and I do agree that the creative expression is a lot of what we see in terms of feedback from students that are driving them to be excited about the technology. So I don't have much to add there, but I do think that taking a historical perspective of how this all pans out potentially in 5 to 10 years, like that excites us too. Because on our team, we do strongly believe that 5 to 10 years out, AR and VR are going to be very useful, like throughout society and in a lot of different verticals. We don't know exactly where or how, but we're confident that that will happen. Something that is less clear is whether or not today's high school students and aspiring creators are going to be prepared to contribute to that. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us to own. Because if we make sure that they can contribute, then the future changes. They go to college, or maybe they jump straight into the workforce and they start contributing immediately. Teams start to look more diverse, more people are in the conversation and in the room and actually influencing not just the direction of the technology, but the applications that are created. And so that's really important to us. When we think about the current tech space, it's easy to see that, when the internet first took off, when mobile first took off and so on, we weren't always thinking about like all the different ways that it could pan out. We didn't have all of the opinions in the room. But I think that as a society and historically, like we don't need to make that mistake again. We actually have a chance to see that this could end up being a really important technology. And given that's going to happen, we really want young students to be creating for it so that they can be a part of where that goes.
I think I have something to say to that too, is that the reason that I do all this technology or work with all this technology in my classroom, coding, robotics, all this other stuff, is because that is a language that my students understand.
Yeah.
Technology is something that they speak through really well. And I think that starting them with that, even talking to students specifically, they have so many more ideas with that technology. Teachers, they actually are talking to their students now to fix computer problems, it's just something that they understand. They're born with that knowledge. So having them develop in that is just really powerful for them and for their education. So.
It also leads to, I just want to chime in, building on that, an interesting challenge that we see with different classrooms. There are some classrooms where it is very teacher-driven and the teacher wants to drive a lot of the programs and whatever is happening. There are others that are more similar to the East model where the teachers hand it over to the students and they drive the progress. And I think that managing those two and contributing to them is really, really tricky when you're working with something like VR that changes so rapidly, because the skills that you need to stay on top of it are always changing. So even if we do professional development or a training 1 month, the space could totally change in about 2 or 3 months. And so it leads to this really hard situation where who should kind of be driving the way forward on this inside of a classroom? Should it be a teacher? Should it be the student? What we're finding is that it changes based on the classroom, but I think that's something that's interesting to think about.
Just wait until the Oculus Go comes out.
Yeah.
Changing again.
So I'd like to bring it to the room again. Yes?
I mean, just to comment on what you just said, ideally it's a collaborative learning environment where teacher and student are learning and building and creating together.
Yeah.
Continuously, right? I wanted to ask you, what's your footprint like in New York City? Are you in New York City schools?
Some of our team is in New York.
I'm a school principal, so I would love to chat with you after this to talk about a possible partnership. It's great for Arkansas. Congratulations. I think there are a lot of possibilities in New York also.
Yeah, I would love to talk more. We work with a few different schools actually across different states. So we actually work with some schools in New York, but it's on a per principal, per school, per teacher level, so we could talk more about bigger collaborations.
So other questions? We've just had some interesting things brought up. The mention of professional development. Go ahead and hurl it.
Crucial catch. Nice.
So professional development, teacher-led, student-led, the idea that this is actually a new language, that maybe the students speak better than the teachers. Yes?
I'm wondering, is there any cross-curriculum? Are you leading in the humanities courses at all, or how do you see that you'd be able to do that with speaking standards, writing, et cetera?
Specifically, I actually have, there's a program that I use where I have my students, after we read a book, I have them build a different ending to the story with 3D objects. and then actually you have the ability to write and do speech bubbles inside of it. And so they're actually writing from the character's perspective, and they're building, they're creating in 3D, and then they can actually collaborate on the space with other students, or they can share it out as well. And so then they can put it in VR with our cardboard sets, and they can actually walk through that experience. So they could actually build a full writing project, 3D project in VR. So I mean, it can be, the ability to create can be applied to any of that. So and there's a lot of programs out there that are easily used to supplement that, supplement in different subject areas or different fields. I think it's just a matter of imagination and how to use them to those fields. And I think the companies are doing really well. I want to make sure I thank Lifelike and their support and everything, and everyone for saying the very kind words. But you can even put it to the companies. A lot of the companies, if you reach out to them on Twitter or whatever, they will literally develop things for you, for the teachers. For the Merge Cube, which you can do in VR, you can reach out on Twitter, and there's developers out there that work closely with Merge, and they'll develop things for you. There's a social emotional learning app for that in VR. So it's just a possibility of imagination and how you can implement this and work it into the curriculum.
So I would also add, so there's an inspirational teacher we work with called Tammy Dunbar. She's in Manteca, which is Central Valley, so John Steinbeck country here in California. And what she has just started using is she's also using augmented reality with her early English learners. And so what she's doing is she's giving them a word or a sentence. There's a slide it's the last slide of a presentation that I'm using later today, but it's it shows this is a monkey, and it shows a boy. He has taken the monkey and created an image in augmented reality with him next to it, and that's how he's learning it. So it's bringing it to life for him. And then there are other, this is a leaf, this is a tree, this is a heart. And so it's a way to really drive active learning for early English learners.
The research company that I work with for VR, they also, they found that VR works really well with learning languages, like just being able to immerse yourself in a language, like have that immersive experience. They found that a lot of people use it for learning a second language or learning languages. So there's a lot of possibilities out there, I think.
So we have another question back here, yeah?
So I'm involved in the state level education policy. I'm all with you, so I support the idea. There are two groups I want to think about. One, how do you work with families who are not only not technologically savvy, but they see VR as just like a really new, possible dangerous reality? How do you build in comfort level for them? And then number two, how do you convince educators that you should come on board, but by the way, this is not going to be a testable item. You're going to be accountable for 3 years down the line. Let's see that as well.
I just want to add, just as part of that, I think that Lifelike's work in the libraries is kind of an interesting way to introduce the entire community to how extended reality can be an educational experience and not a scary experience. So I would love to hear you speak to that, but then I'm sure that others have ideas too.
So I'll start exactly there because these gentlemen have more expertise to answer your specific question. But so I agree exactly with the way that you described that. What we see, so when we're in, even though the majority of the students that we work with every week, every day, are general education students, we have a big heart for working with special needs students, for also working with at-risk students who are in alternative schools, and we work a lot with Title I schools, and so basically we hear the same thing that you've described. So what's happened is in these schools that we're going into, they're using typically, every school has either Windows or iOS or Google Chromebooks. They have one of those three or some combination, every school in America. And so they're starting with, not to say this in a self-serving way, but this is just what I know, is they're starting with our interactive 3D models first, which also includes augmented reality. So that every school in America can have that today, and there hasn't been any concern or fear from the parents. The parents love it, even if they're low tech. The first teacher in the world, to my knowledge, that taught with our learning experiences in virtual reality and HTC Vive, she makes sure that I tell everyone that she's a grandmother and low tech. She's a grandmother, and she'll yell at me if I don't repeat that. So she said, look, if I can learn it, any teacher in the world can do it. So now getting to the virtual reality and the mixed reality side of what you're talking about, because that's where it then does come in increasingly, absolutely. What's happening is these things are, VR is, I'm seeing it as more, like a 1 to 3 year thing, mixed reality, 1 to 4 years, and continuing. So these are, yes, they're very early on, and the way that we're introducing them into the public is what Hester was just referring to. We're part of the California Library Association pilot. There are already 100 Oculus Rifts from Facebook in 100 public libraries across the state of California today, and 60 HTC Vives, 40 more going out in the next 4 weeks. And then there's a content portal that's being launched to support this with free content for 6 months. So there's going to be 200 public libraries across the whole state. And that's how we're introducing it to families. One of my favorite photos of the last year is a cowboy in Nevada wearing his cowboy hat. He had to take it off to go into virtual reality. And he's a grandfather. And just the last thing I'll say is that we're also working with the state of Nevada. They're doing the same pilot, going to 11 public libraries across the whole state.
I did a future careers family night at my school. I organized a family night and had the families come and experience the HTC Vive and experience Google Cardboard and kind of showed them what we're doing, and they just became fascinated with what it was. So
I'll just quickly say, I think your question speaks to the teacher and the support at the local level. So we have some communities that have done a great job exactly doing what you've asked of involving the community. In fact, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of, that they have a Googled sign-up sheet for their Facebook-provided VR kit for people from outside the community to come into the school and experience VR using the touches and all that it brings to them. And I mean, what better way to get that's a great way to get parents into the school for something positive. Quite often we only see parents in schools when it's about something negative, especially at the higher grade levels. So I think that it falls back on creating a culture in technology. Where I grew up, the few computers that were in our school, students weren't allowed to touch. We sure weren't allowed to tear apart. And I walk into some labs today, and you walk in, the teacher's got the kids sitting there taking the computer hardware apart to see if they can put it back together. And, and that's the type of culture that we're hoping to replicate across the state of Arkansas, that thought process that this technology is not going to, the students aren't going to learn about this technology. It's sitting over in the corner collecting dust. They've got to get their hands on there. They've got to get dirty, and they've got to really experience it. And that's one reason that we wanted every high school and now have every high school with one of these kits.
Great. Any other questions?
I'll do better throwing this one.
Anything else? Yeah, sure.
You just said something that made me think differently. Are you involved with either juvenile justice or adult facilities? They often don't want to allow technology in for all the reasons. They often say it's because of porn. I'm like, it's too late for that. That's already in there.
yeah.
But the virtual part, there's something there. I don't know if you're involved in it or not.
Yeah.
So we work with, I would say, one step before we work with alternative schools where there's what's called the Marin Community School. It's in Marin County, and this is the last chance for high school students before juvenile hall, and sometimes the first chance for them when they're coming out of juvenile hall. And I had the privilege of teaching in there one day. Facebook's Oculus Rift was there as well. I was using HTC Vive and the HoloLens, and then also Google Tilt Brush, being able to create and paint in VR was also there. And the teacher told me two things before I arrived. She said, number one, just expect a really low turnout because, 3 or 4 students. Because these students, school's the last place in the world they want to be because they've been through so much trauma. These are, it'd just break your heart if we knew, heard all their stories. They've been through just so much, they may have PTSD, problems with drugs and alcohol. It runs the gamut. Number two, she said they're going to be entirely disengaged. They're just, because they don't want to be here, right? Or they just, I showed up, one student showed up high, and just the protocol is his, the police had, his officer had to show up. And so showed up, and it was PAC class, number one. And I said, what's going on? And the teacher said, we made the decision to tell them that they're learning immersively today. So they all wanted to be here. Number two, it was the most excited, engaged class that I've seen. I've never seen more excited. And I asked her, so how does that happen? She goes, this is just, we as a community were able to reach them through immersive learning by learning in 3D in a way that we've just never been able to reach them before.
Great. Okay, so we basically have 1 minute left, although we'll stick around and answer your guys' questions. Final thoughts? I mean, I think that there's so much, and Hassan, I think you touched upon it in terms of first we have the web, then we have mobile, now we have XR. So final thoughts on the great promise of XR in education? Maybe start with Anthony and work back this way.
There are really just two sides, just quickly. One, you're talking about content development or consumption of information. There were statements that the TV would replace Latin teachers back in the 50s. Well, obviously that didn't happen, and Latin's dead now. So don't look at XR as the tool that's going to solve all the education problems of the world. That's why we say it's part of that toolkit. Look at it as a new way for your kids to experience creating content.
Great.
Just adding on that, really just putting everyone in position to be an infinite creator instead of a consumer. I think that's the greatest promise.
Nick?
I think from hearing a lot of the comments, VR kind of helps with perspective, and a lot of the focus with the research was from perspective, and I think that giving students another perspective, utilizing technology, which they know is pretty powerful. So I think that's a good future.
All right, you got 6 seconds.
And the last thing I would say is engagement is critical, of course. We should all be focusing on that, but I also believe we should be raising the bar, and that the bar should be excitement as well in the classroom.
Thanks, everybody, for coming and for your questions. We're happy to
Thank you guys.
stick around.
Make it rain.
Thank you.
Sorry, I took up most of the time.
Oh, you're fine.
I feel like I
We
blabbered
just have to
on.
de-mic first.
Great job.
Get ready for the next folks to come up.
Good to see you, Jim.
Yeah,
Hassan.
you too. It was a lot of fun.